Welcome to another episode of GQ Speaks, your go-to platform for insightful conversations, captivating stories, and thought-provoking discussions. GQ is a series of experiences, and we're just making sense of that as we go along. That is what we're doing here, one conversation at a time. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into our episode. In Harrara, students showed us that activism doesn't always shout. Sometimes it speaks. Through dialogue and through the simple act of engaging, they try to create change. Today, our story carries that same spirit, but in many different forms. A blend of voices, choices, and risks, because student activism is never just one thing.
It's Monday afternoon at Georgetown University, Qatar. I'm sitting in our campus auditorium, third row from the back. On stage, I see Dean Safwan Masri approaching the podium to begin his opening remarks. He finishes by inviting Annalena Baerbock, President of the 80th UN General Assembly and Germany's former foreign minister, to the stage. It's the day before the Second World Summit for Social Development officially kicks off in Doha. Leaders from across the globe have gathered to quote-unquote redefine strategies for social progress. Their goal? To build societies that are more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable.
Annalena Baerbock is here to address those same challenges, and part of her visit includes a keynote address at Georgetown University in Qatar, titled Our World Today, Your World Tomorrow, followed by a Q&A moderated by a GQ student, Moza Al-Hajri, who's from the class of 2026. As the university would later go on to recognize, Moza's leading under fire, stepping onto the stage at a time when student emotions are running high. In that moment, she was not only a moderator, but also a student and a Qatari citizen, carrying each identity at once and navigating their weight in real time.
Baerbock adjusts the microphone. The room is packed. Every seat is taken. I glance around my fellow students. Everyone's been waiting for this moment. For about a minute, all is still. Baerbock starts speaking in smooth, practiced tones. Then, almost in unison, dozens of students rise from their seats.
Dear Dean Safwan Masri, ladies and gentlemen, but most of all, dear student, even though I'm seeing that many of you are leaving, probably because we have intensive discussions in front of us, but I'm here to discuss because I think this is what we need in these days, discussions that you look to the world from different perspectives, but may I invite you maybe also to join, because I think after discussions you realize very often that you look from different perspectives, but that we share all the same values, the values of humanity, which are guiding our work.
And I think that's when 2/3 of the room, I would say, just stood up, mostly silently, with these signs, which I believe most of them were printed images from Gaza, I believe. Maybe some written signs as well. I'm not 100% sure anymore. And yeah, I think it was a very powerful moment.
That's Professor Gabor Scheiring. He's an assistant professor of comparative politics at Georgetown University in Qatar. He's right in pointing out that the moment is powerful. In that silent exit, there's both grief and fury, but there's also uncertainty. Some students are clutching photos of destroyed buildings and slain children. Others are holding posters of Baerbock herself, shaking hands with the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu.
I feel the gust of air as classmates hurry past me to the aisle. Part of me wants to walk out with them, to join the collective refusal. Another part of me is rooted to my chair, watching this entire scene unfold. I'm not alone. Scattered across the hall, a handful of students still remain seated. A few of us have chosen to stay. In the front row, I spot Ahmed Zayed, a Palestinian senior, still in his seat. Ahmed's a central character in our story, more on him in a bit, but For now, all of this is part of a plan. Some people will walk out, some will stay and confront, and some, like me, will simply witness.
This is not a simple story of heroes and villains. It's not a tidy tale of righteous students versus an evil institution. It's way more complicated than that, messy even, because we're still trying to figure out what student activism should look like here. We're inside a tightly governed, globally positioned university in Qatar, where the rules of engagement are somewhat unclear and the emotional stakes are sky high.
So how do you protest here? What does meaningful student activism look like in an institution that preaches dialogue and global citizenship, but at that same time feels constrained by protocols and politics? As I sit in that auditorium, watching my classmates walk out on a government minister, that question looms over me. And that's the question we'll be wrestling with in this story.
In this episode, we'll report from inside the student walkout that met Annalena Baerbock's visit to GAQ. We'll unfold the events in real time, grappling morally and intellectually with what happened. We'll explore how we as students navigate between engagement and withdrawal. And, most importantly, we'll hear how our institutional language of dialogue and decorum collides with lived grief and urgency.
We'll try our level best to not flatten this into a simple good versus bad debate. Instead, we'll let competing truths hang in tension. Walking out as refusal, staying and speaking up as confrontation, administrators following protocol, and a campus community whose collective grief is fast collapsing any patience for polite civility. There's just way too much to unpack. Let's rewind to a few hours before the walkout. It's Monday morning on campus and things already seem out of the ordinary. News of Annalena Baerbock's visit has spread like wildfire.
Baerbock is coming as part of the Dean's Distinguished Speaker Series. She would speak about leadership in fragmented times and the role of international organizations, followed by a Q&A.
Now, on paper, this sounds like a prestige event. A high-profile foreign dignitary visiting the School of Foreign Service. But to many of us, especially Palestinian students, the timing is what makes it unacceptable. The war in Gaza is raging into its second year, and Baerbock isn't a neutral observer to that war.
One of the first people to raise the alarm against her is Ayet Bouhajeb. Ayet is a GEQ alumna from the class of 2024. If you've been around campus in the last few years, you probably know her. She's one of the few students who's really tested the university's boundaries on protest before. During the visit of British ambassador, she coordinated a silent walkout that became an early template for how dissent could be staged within the GEQ ecosystem. She's not a student anymore, but she was still plugged in, monitoring all the group chats, offering advice, nudging the current generation of students to think carefully about what kind of response this moment calls for.
So the first time I heard about it was the email sent from the dean's office. And as soon as I did, I immediately texted like my friend group. We're all Georgetown alumni, and we were all very baffled at the news.
Ayet wasn't the only one. The reaction across alumni circles was fast and confused. But what struck her most was the silence.
I immediately was very surprised that no one had texted on the SJB group chat. So it feels as an alum, you might not be, I don't know how that would have been received since I'm not on campus and I'm not as involved.
Still, she decided to say something. She didn't know the new leadership well, but she knew that this moment mattered.
I just thought that it might be worth just flagging it and making sure that the new students, because I'm not very familiar with the leadership now. Ahmed was my batch and I know him, but I'm not really familiar as much with the student body anymore. So I thought I would just text and make it known that students can and should, in these circumstances, do something about it.
Ahmed had already been moving. A statement was in the works. But for Ayet, statements were only part of the picture.
And I remember Ahmed had texted saying that there's going to be a release of a statement, which is, we're no strangers to statements being released, and I'm not minimizing the impact of a statement from SJP or from any other student organization. It was actually beautiful seeing all of the other associations and groups on campus coming together for the statement. But I just wanted to make sure that students are aware that they have other options too to make their voices heard.
She'd seen it before, when events get planned without student input and when official statements don't quite capture the depth of student anger.
with administration, we've seen it a lot that maybe our voices are not taken into consideration when planning any of these large-scale events. And sometimes these events are not planned by our administration, or they don't have the power to cancel an event. I really try to be not as involved, because I know that these conversations take a lot of time for students to organize themselves and really figure out what would be the most appropriate way to go about this. It just felt like it was the right thing to do. And although I'm an alumna, it still felt like I couldn't allow, or I couldn't be at peace with myself knowing that a place I called home is hosting such an awful person without the administration and everyone involved knowing that this is not okay and that the student body is not okay with such a thing.
As Germany's foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock emphatically supported Israel's bombardment of Gaza. We had all seen the clips of her justifying strikes on civilian targets, dismissing outrage as propaganda. So, for students grieving over thousands of Palestinian lives, her presence felt like an insult. Still, the decision to host her had been made. It hasn't been made by students. In fact, it probably hasn't even been made by the university administration. Georgetown campus here in Qatar exists in a delicate balance with the host country's authorities and sponsors. Now, sometimes that might mean that we don't get to choose our own guests. Professor Omar Khalifah, who teaches Arabic literature and culture at JQ and is himself Palestinian, understood this dilemma well. He told us that he learned of Baerbock's visit almost by accident, by seeing some posters in the Red Square and then connecting the dots with the dean's email. He wasn't particularly thrilled about her visit, but he guessed Georgetown's hands were tied by politics beyond our campus.
Georgetown was asked to host her, so it wasn't Georgetown initiative, and I don't think Georgetown had a choice. It was, I don't want to use the word forced to do it. You're functioning within a specific system and you have a specific relationship with the country here. If the state or if an external player asked Georgetown or requested Georgetown, let's maybe put it this way, to host a person, then Georgetown would host that person.
So perhaps the administration had to roll out the red carpet for Baerbock, and given so, an event was scheduled in the auditorium for that afternoon. For students, however, this set off a storm. There was anger, confusion, and a burning question. What do we do about it? Do we protest? And if so, how? Some floated the idea of boycotting the talk entirely, just not showing up. Others argued we should attend and grill Baerbock with hard-hitting questions during the Q&A. Posters were taped up around campus, student clubs began releasing statements, WhatsApp group chats were in chaos.
And when I woke up in the morning, I found all hell had broken loose in the group. People, arguing over, no, we should walk out. No, we should talk. We should challenge. And so it was essentially, we tried to, get everything in order literally less than 2 hours before the event. But it worked, alhamdulillah.
That's Ahmed Zayed. He's a senior and co-leader of our Students for Justice in Palestine Club. All morning, Ahmed and his fellow organizers have been juggling phone calls and text messages, trying to forge a plan out of the frenzy. By 11 a.m., just 2 hours before Baerbock's talk, they finally reach a consensus. They wouldn't boycott the event, but they wouldn't participate either. They would do both. Their idea seems bold. Stage a massive walkout and ensure only a few students stay behind to confront Baerbock directly with questions. In Ahmed's mind, this was the only way to send a clear message without letting Baerbock off the hook.
So we knew that boycotting the event was not possible. One, because a lot of staff were going to attend, and two, because students as well. I'm sure a lot of them would have attended either way, because either they would be ignorant to, Annalena Baerbock and her stance vis-a-vis the genocide in Gaza, or because they're just interested in meeting this ex-foreign minister of Germany, which of course, in my opinion, is the wrong mindset to have, because you shouldn't, glorify those in power, you should question them. And we made sure we did not want to be rebels without a cause. We weren't making a statement of, let's boycott Annalena Baerbock, she's a person in, she's a person of power or a person in power. We said, let's boycott Annalena Baerbock or protest her because of the statements that she has made.
For Ahmed, context is everything. This wasn't about protesting power in the abstract sense. He wanted to protest against complicity in genocide. He reminded fellow activists that he hadn't supported every protest of every VIP who had been to campus before.
If you remember, there was a similar incident before when the British ambassador came to Georgetown and students organized the walkout. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it. I essentially told the students who organized the walkout, As a Palestinian, as a Gazan, I really do respect the efforts, but I personally disagree with this because that person is not some genocide yet.
He's referencing here to the British ambassador's visit to GQ from almost 2 years ago. Students had staged a similar silent walkout protest on principle, seeing him as a symbol of colonialism. So it's not like a silent walkout was something unprecedented. However, what everyone seemed to be wrestling with now was a deeper implication, the rationale. Why walk out in the first place? Why stay seated? Why speak? And if so, how do I explain that choice to myself, to my friends, or even to my professors? Ahmed hadn't walked out in the case of the British ambassador. Instead, he stayed and confronted him directly during the Q&A.
So I came. Everyone walked out and I came wearing my kufiya and I grilled him. I challenged him and I told him, listen, my grandfather and my father have been killed in this genocide. How can you come here and teach us about diplomacy and blah, blah, blah when citizens are being erased off of the face of the earth and you're not even courageous enough to condemn? And he gave a response and students said, oh, but he's a diplomat. He's going to respond in a very, tactical method. I was like, exactly. So you go and you learn their tools. You learn how they respond. So you have more experience in confronting, the, for lack of a better word, slippery politicians and diplomats, right? Good politicians, essentially. The problem wasn't, let's boycott it because it's in the spotlight, she's a person in power. It's boycotted because of the principles that she has broken, the principles that she goes against with her statements and actions.
Hence, Baerbock, in Ahmed's eyes, was different because she had crossed all possible red lines. She was directly complicit in the ongoing slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. For him, and many others, that put her in a different category altogether.
Like, this is one of the students, Amir, to give credit where credit's due, said something that was very well put in a very precise manner. He basically said, Annalena Baerbock is so complicit that if there were Nuremberg trials for the genocidaire regime in Israel who committed the genocide against Gaza, Annalena Baerbock would be charged and put behind bars. That's how complicit she is. She was part and parcel of manufacturing consent. She was part and parcel of enabling and perpetuating a genocide. And that's what was so unsettling to us.
So far, this rationale makes sense, but it's not like it didn't face any opposing views. Now, people might understand the rationale behind something, but still it's very much possible to have reservations over what's the most effective course of action.
I want to thank the people in Georgetown, students, faculty, staff, who stood by our side, who understood our concern, but who also reminded us that at the end of the day, Georgetown University is a university about accommodating all, about being global citizens, quote unquote, about listening to, the opinion of the other. And I personally, of course, disagreed with this as Ahmed. I know this is Georgetown policy and I respect it, but as Ahmed, I disagree with this because how far are you willing to go when you say you want to apply this basis, this rule of let's listen to everyone?
So he asked a question, not to provoke, but to reveal the limits of that logic.
And I gave the example in one of the confrontations that happened. I said, and this is very controversial, but I said it, of course, sarcastically to sort of bring the point about. They said, someone told me, don't you think we should listen to those in power? And I told them, absolutely not. If anything, Georgetown teaches us to question those in power, not to listen to them.
Not all power, he clarified, but unchecked power. Power that hides behind polite language.
Of course, we engage with them, but we question them. We don't just listen blindly or and ironically, we can't listen while being deaf. You have to challenge and you have to criticize and you have to question. That's what Georgetown's all about.
And then he pushed the logic one step further.
And so I told them, listen, with all due respect, how far are you willing to go with accommodating the other? And they said, as far as I need to go. As long as, there's an opinion to be heard, then I will hear it. And I told them, what about bringing Osama bin Laden? If Osama bin Laden was alive, should we bring him to Georgetown, Qatar? He's a terrorist. He's a terrorist who killed civilians, who killed innocents. Should he be allowed a platform in Qatar?
The question landed hard, and Ahmed knew exactly what he was doing.
And the person said, are you comparing Osama bin Laden to Annalena Baerbock? I told them, no, Annalena Baerbock in my eyes is much worse. She enabled the genocide of, at least officially as I mentioned, over 70,000 martyrs. She is a terrorist. She is a genocidaire. She was part and parcel of the Zionist propaganda machine that manufactured consent for the killing of Palestinians, for the ethnic cleansing, for the erasure of Palestinian existence, not just lives.
The debate was, of course, heated, but by noon, students had settled on a strategy that balanced refusal with engagement. They would encourage the entire audience to fill the hall, to not give Baerbock the easy way out of a half-empty room. But once she began speaking, as many students as possible would stand up and peacefully walk out in protest. At the same time, a small team of volunteer students would stay behind to confront her during the question and answer segment.
With the clock ticking towards the 1 p.m. event, Ahmed and his co-leader from the SJP chapter, a sophomore named Carmen Saleh, gathered students in the Red Square to finalize their plan. Who would stay to ask questions? Where should everyone sit for maximum impact?
So, yeah, we basically asked people who are willing to volunteer to stay behind and question. And we picked 3 or 4. And then we organized, Carmen and I, we asked them to meet in the Red Square so that we can, go over in terms of seating arrangement, right? Because when you walk out, you don't want to be in the very back seats, right? That's not as visible. You want to be in the front seats and you want to be strategically placed and whatnot. And to also get a sort of an idea of how many of us there were. At first, the plan was for me to walk out because I was still uncomfortable with the idea of speaking up, with the idea of engaging with Annalena Baerbock. But then the students said that no, like being, Gaza and Palestinian, someone who suffered directly from this and someone who's known to be outspoken and whatnot, it's very likely that they would choose me. So I should stay behind to have sort of an increased likelihood of one of us being picked. And I was like, oh, okay, that's the plan then.
12:50 p.m. 10 minutes to showtime. Professor Gabor Scheiring is making his way to the auditorium. Professor Scheiring hails from Hungary. He has long been following Annalena Baerbock's career. He notices a strangely empty auditorium for a high-profile event like this. Something is clearly afoot.
I arrived, I think, a few minutes earlier, not super early, but a few minutes earlier before the event. And usually these events, they fill up very quickly, right? So I think a few minutes earlier, it was almost completely empty. And then I'd say just when it was about to start, you could see that a lot of people were arriving, which already suggested coordination in a sense of people arriving in great numbers at the same time.
As the dean steps up to the podium to introduce the speaker, students poured in. They take their places, pressing printed images and placards against their chests, hidden from view for now. The clock strikes 1 p.m. It is time. Dean Masri concludes his introduction and gestures to Baerbock. She makes her way to begin her keynote address. I see her approaching the podium, but my mind is elsewhere, on the plan. The tension in the air is electric. Baerbock thanks the university for the invitation and launches into scripted remarks. That's our cue.
Dear Dean Safwan Masri, ladies.
Man, like the walkout was so massive, the students literally needed a good 3 or 4 minutes to leave because it was so crowded at the door. So for them to organize and leave in 1 or 2 rows, it took like a good 3-4 minutes. My guess is 80 to 100 could have been even more. I was really, really proud. I was really, really, really grateful. It genuinely is. It's such a breath of fresh air to see that people still care, that people are willing to make a stance, to take a stance, to make a statement, even when it might, jeopardize some aspects of their life.
For Ahmed and the other organizers, this turnout exceeded all expectations. What they thought might be 20 students became close to 100, and it was all orderly. As everyone left, they did so without a word, holding out signs for Baerbock and for everyone else to see. Those posters told their own story.
So the posters included pictures and, commemoration of or remembrance of Hind Rajab, Allah yarhamha. There were also pictures of Annalena Baerbock shaking hands with the war criminal, genocidaire Benjamin Netanyahu, wanted by international law, by the ICC. There were other posters of pictures of Gaza being destroyed, pictures of martyrs, remembering the victims, but also condemning the criminals. Annalena Baerbock being one of them, by the way.
Within minutes, the majority of the audience has emptied out. Outside the auditorium doors, the crowd of walkout students gathers in the atrium, shaking with adrenaline. I go back inside. People are left scattered in the hall, a mix of faculty, some administrators, and a handful of students who either chose not to protest or have stayed as part of the plan. The atmosphere is surreal. Annalena Baerbock continues speaking, trying to regain her composure. It's not so easy to pretend. The hall that was buzzing with energy just a moment ago is now almost 2/3 empty and heavy with unspoken outrage. Every empty seat is a statement. I spot Professor Gabor Scheiring sitting a few rows ahead of me, arms crossed. Also among those still here is Ahmed, who now sits near the front, eyes fixed on Baerbock. For him, walking out was only phase 1. Phase 2 is about to come.
Professor Scheiring, who knows Ahmed, is quietly feeling a sense of anticipation, even satisfaction, that this young man is staying put.
Ahmed, yeah. So I knew him before, and I knew that he's from Palestine. And I was happy to see that he stayed, because I think it's important to engage these people and make them feel uncomfortable. And speaking truth to power, I think, is a very important mission of people who feel responsibility for their societies.
As the minutes ticked by, a different picture of Baerbock emerges. One of a seasoned politician utterly failing to address the moment.
Professor Scheiring's disbelief would later spill out in a LinkedIn post that quickly went viral online. He called Baerbock's talk, quote, boring, cliché, and unprepared. But it wasn't just the style that bothered him. It was the moral obliviousness.
It was an extremely cliched speech, and saying basically nothing, the vaguest terms, trying to avoid taking positions as much as possible, and most importantly, not reflecting on her country's role, or very vaguely on not anticipating the anger that is gonna be condensed in that room, not being prepared to reach out emotionally or to engage with that anger. If you are a politician at that level, you anticipate what's going to happen and what kind of people you're going to meet. And I'm pretty certain that she knew what kind of audience there's going to be in that room. And yet she decided to give the most boring, grayest speech possible. And what was particularly lacking is not just the kind of the intellectual richness and honesty, but the complete lack of humanity, which I think is, as a European, what Europe's enabling role in the genocide is one of the biggest moral burdens in the past several decades, or maybe one of the biggest in Europe's history. Europe is gonna have to carry that and resolve that somehow, hopefully. And she has zero reflection on this. There's a whole intellectual lack of rethinking this, I think. So there's really an intellectual problem here, an intellectual deficiency. But there's also this moral choice that she walked into this room filled with suffering and anger and actively chose to not engage with that.
It was as if Baerbock had sealed herself off from any moral confrontation. In a way, that made what came next inevitable. When Baerbock finally concluded her remarks, the student moderator on stage opened the floor to questions. I see a few hands going up, including Ahmed's. It is time for phase 2.
Mr. Baerbock, my name is Ahmed Zayed. I'm from Gaza, from Palestine. On February 8th, actually around the end of January 2024, Israel injured my father. They then let him bleed out and prevented him medical treatment for 10 days as he bled internally, and despite efforts to evacuate him from Gaza by the state of Qatar and to provide him treatment, very gracious and generous attempts and various attempts, Israel continuously refused his evacuation until he was killed, martyred on the 8th of February 2024. I'm here today because I've been taught by Georgetown and by my parents before that to speak truth to power. I'm not here today because I believe that you, or that I should afford you the recognition that comes with what you call dialogue and conversation. No, not with someone who refuses to acknowledge my own humanity. I will not do that. I am going to ask a question now. You mentioned, first of all, the theme of this panel, or the theme of this discussion, leadership in fragmented times. But what fragmented times? Fragmented times that were brought about by people like yourself, fragmented times that bequeath to us only the aches of genocide. Genocide in Gaza, genocide in Sudan. These are the times that we are in now. The slogan of the panel is, our world today, your world tomorrow. I don't want your world today. I don't want what you're bequeathing to us. You're bequeathing to us genocide. What you're leaving behind is genocide, violence, racism, double standards. I'm not sure how you can reconcile that. Let me finish, please. Second of all, you speak about gender equality. Over 33,000 women and girls have been killed in Gaza. How do you reconcile your claim sort of achieving gender equality with the fact that over 33,000 women and girls in Gaza have been killed, and yet you went out and said that civilians will lose their protected status? The bombing of Qatar, a terrible accident. It was one of the most well-coordinated attacks in history. Why will you not condemn? That's my question. Why will you not condemn? Why the sickening double standards? Why the sickening double standards? Why will you not condemn? Why will you not? Why will you not condemn? Why the sickening double standards? How can you truly believe that you have the right to come here and lecture us about leadership in fragmented times when you were part and parcel, complicit directly in bringing about these fragmented times?
As soon as I was given the mic, Claire, essentially I was sitting, second row from the front, and I was a few seats in, and there were other people to my right and left, so Claire couldn't really walk into the space between the two rows. So what she did was she literally leaned over the guests and extended her hand to be ready, just in case, to be ready to grasp the mic away from my hand, to nab it from my hand, silence me, censor me, in case I said anything quote-unquote problematic.
The administrator Ahmed is referring to here is Claire Waite. Claire is GQ's Chief Facilities Management Officer. That afternoon, she's responsible for perhaps one of the most difficult tasks of the event, mic handling. She's in a rather impossible position, caught between institutional protocol and a student who's very determined to speak.
So I knew exactly where this was going. I held the mic in my other hand and I took it away from her because I knew she was going to grab it eventually. And I started speaking. I introduced myself to Annalena. I'm Ahmed from Gaza, from Palestine. I lost my father. I lost my grandfather, 120 plus members, more than 120 members of my family. Allah yarhamhum jami'an. And I told her, I'm here not because I want to afford you the recognition that comes with engagement or confrontation. I'm here because I believe in what my father had instilled in me and what Georgetown had taught me, which is speak truth to power.
Ahmed wasn't alone in that struggle. Rania, Harrara, class of 2026, and an active member of the GQ community advocating for women's rights, environmental justice, and the Palestinian cause, found herself facing the same barriers.
I said from the start, I'm not going to ask my questions if you're holding the mic from me, because you can literally censor whatever I say whenever it's convenient for you. I was trying to formulate my question to her. I was literally harassed, and literally footage of a staff member that was harassing me in my ear to finish whatever I have to say. Why would I give them her or anyone that was part of this organizing where you are harassing students for stating their opinion and for wanting to ask questions? Why would I give them the privilege to sit there and listen to her speak, knowing that I'm not going to be able to speak back and have that dialogue that they want us to engage? It's like basically they're forcing you into this fake dialogue where you just can say one thing, but if you say something they disagree with, then you're like being harassed by their staff, and then that you're not going to be able to have a right to reply.
And that, she said, is why she refused to step back. That refusal to yield the mic, to accept a controlled conversation, echoed what Ahmed had already put into words: speaking truth to power. For Ahmed Zayed, that moment came when the framing shifted.
She mentioned in her talk something about being a feminist, being a raging feminist. So I started with that point. More than 33,000 women and girls were killed in Gaza. And you supported that. You said you will not shy away from doing that for the sake of eliminating quote-unquote Hamas terrorists. So how can you say you're a feminist? How will a feminist support the killing of 33,000 girls and women? And when I say girls, I'm talking about babies as young as 0 days and women as old as 60 and 70 and 80 and 100 years. And I then mentioned the fact that this session, the session where Annalena was invited, ironically, was called Leadership in Fragmented Times. And the slogan was, our world today, your world tomorrow. And I told her, I don't want your world, Ms. Baerbock. I don't want anything that has anything to do with your world. Your world bequeathed to us nothing but racism, injustice, genocide, the aches of genocide. What do you mean your world? What do you mean you want to give us your world? What do you think is there to be so proud about your world? And how can you, leadership in fragmented times, how can you, after supporting genocide, after manufacturing consent for the killing of civilians, how can you truly believe that you have the right to be here and lecture us about leadership?
Ahmed's words hang in the air. I don't want your world. All eyes turn to Annalena Baerbock. How will she respond? Will she respond? The German politician shifts her weight and gives a tight, grimacing smile. She says something about understanding the pain in the room, but quickly pivots into a rehearsed defense. It's not much of an answer at all. If anything, Baerbock's response, all diplomatic smoothness and deflection, it only underlines the disconnect that Ahmed just called her out for.
When you failed so miserably at it. And of course, and I'm not even kidding, I'm not even being facetious, she said, her first statement was, I'm here because I was invited. That was her response. And then she went on to, and I swear to you, I'm not kidding, she went on to say, Hitler killed 6 million Jews. What does that have to do with anything? No one, literally no one before me, no one after me, not even herself, ever mentioned the Holocaust, or the genocide of the Jews, or the anti-Semitism, which is of course a very real part of history. We're not here to say no, it didn't happen, or to deny or dismiss Jewish suffering. But why do you have to speak about Jewish suffering when I'm speaking about Palestinian suffering? If anything, that should have been the reason why you should have avoided this genocide, not supported it. How can you try to correct one sin with another?
I remember feeling a wave of anger and pity and exhaustion all at once. This moment, a student speaking truth to power basically shrugging it off, it encapsulated the very imbalance we feared. After a couple more exchanges, the event wrapped up. There was no grand showdown beyond these interventions. There didn't need to be. The message had been sent. As the small audience trickled out, Baerbock was whisked away by her protocol handlers, and outside, clusters of students were waiting. Some were scrolling through social media already, typing up what had happened. The protest posters lay in a pile, having served their purpose. I spotted Professor Omar Khalifah huddled around a bunch of students.
I actually ran out when the students, because I didn't know the plan. I didn't know that they divided themselves. Some stay, some leave, or few stay, the majority leaves. So I actually went outside and I spoke to some students. I told them, why are you leaving? Isn't it better just to stay and maybe press her with questions?
His concern isn't really about the protest. It's about the effectiveness.
Because I would really feel bad if this person came here and had just some students boycotting her and then the rest of the event would run smoothly. That would be, in my opinion, that would be really too respectful. We can always press people respectfully. I'm not asking for any disrespectful behavior, but you got the point. But then she explained, one of the students said, my suggestion, which was improvisation on my end, I said, how about you come back? And then she said, why do you want us to come? What's the point? I said, maybe further disruption. They said they were worried about doing this disruption. Is it even, not only productive, is it even allowed? I don't know much about rules here in the administration. So it was obvious that they were sure that walking out is permissible, but they were not sure if returning to disrupt the event also peacefully is permissible. So I said, I don't want to give you my word and then I don't want to get into trouble, etc. Just think about it and make a decision. And obviously they did not return. But when I was speaking to them, I didn't know that Ahmed and other students remained inside the auditorium. Thinking about it now, maybe at that moment when I saw the students walking out, I felt that maybe they shouldn't walk out, they shouldn't have done this, they should stay and press her. But after the event, when I realized that no, they divided themselves, I think that was a good combination of protest plus confronting this person and asking questions. Because again, as I said, if this person left Georgetown without seeing the rage in students' question, then it would have been really smooth. And it shouldn't be smooth because this person is complicit.
In the aftermath of the 3rd November walkout, our campus continued to buzz with these kinds of discussions. You see, GQ is a small campus, and as some of our classmates put it, it definitely feels like an echo chamber sometimes. Almost everyone here broadly shares a similar stance on Palestine, which is passionate support for Palestinian rights. But this can create an odd dynamic sometimes. Since we're so accustomed to agreement on this issue, we aren't really used to real confrontation or dissent in our midst. Large-scale protests don't really happen that often. As Professor Scheiring observed, GQQ isn't exactly an activist campus. At least, not in comparison to universities in the United States, or even our main campus in Washington, D.C.
I haven't seen that much activism. I've seen the wall and the solidarity, Palestine solidarity. I'm not sure I've seen much student activism. I had a student, Ayet, a Tunisian student, and I know that she created trouble in her speech, but I wasn't here. I just heard about it. So that's the thing that comes to my mind. Yeah, in her kind of, I'm not even sure how or what it was, but she was supposed to talk about other things, and then she just said, no, I'm gonna talk whatever. And then she really annoyed the dean. But I think it's courage and stick to your principles. So I countered this a few times, but I wouldn't say that this is a particularly, it's not like an activist campus, certainly not at a level that you usually see in the US or Europe.
That Tunisian student Professor Scheiring just referred to again is Ayet Bouhajeb. In the walkout against the British ambassador we mentioned earlier, Ayet pretty much played the same coordinating role we now see Ahmed playing against Annalena Baerbock. Ayet pushed for collective action, defined her rationale, and coordinated action while being mindful of university policy. In doing so, she came to understand the rules of engagement in a place like this. We reached out to Ayet to understand her thinking. While she couldn't attend this walkout herself, she kept following along in group chats. She walked us through how she saw the events unfold.
As a Hoya, I understand how important dialogue is, and I see the value of dialogue in multiple instances. But in here, it just seemed like this person we're not going to change her if we challenge her and talk to her. But that was my personal opinion. So what I tried to do on the group chat is try to make sure that the students are aware of what they can do, right? So I had sent a text saying that, guys, you can do a silent walkout, you can stay and challenge her. Both of these options are available. But I wanted to make sure that the students are also aware of the student code of conduct and how they can organize themselves and how they can do this in a way that doesn't lead to any complications afterwards or to any consequences in terms of disrupting the event, especially that this is such a high-level event, right, with involvement of external parties. So which is what I wish I had as guidance, and I did eventually when I reached out during my time in Georgetown, but I was like, you guys can't block exits, you can't block the view of someone, all of these rules that were in the student code of conduct. And I personally tried to push for the mass silent walkout just because we've seen that it is very impactful. But I was also very pleasantly surprised with the way that the student had organized themselves in a way that only 2 or 3 people would remain to ask her very tough questions, not in the aim of changing her, but in the aim of holding her accountable and making sure that she knows that we know what she said and what she had stood for and everything, that like we're not passive attendees here or audience, but we're going to hold you accountable, but we're not all going to give you the time of day to BS us and start talking about all of these things that we all know are not gonna, does not or do not reflect on her character truly.
Were you there physically?
It was very hard to leave work to go there, but I was glued to my phone, following up and like texting people that were there and that were able to make it, who are alumni, and trying to be part of the event. I was there spiritually, I promise, but I couldn't be there in person. But I was really excited following up, and I made it known to every colleague that I had in the room that, guys, this is very important that's happening at Georgetown. And it was really a moment of pride for me.
In the days after, we spoke again with Professor Omar Khalifah. Professor Khalifah occupies a unique position. He's a faculty member, but also Palestinian and deeply empathetic with the students' sentiments. He admitted he was torn throughout the whole episode. On one hand, as an educator, he values exposing students to opposing viewpoints. On the other hand, he was outraged that someone like Baerbock was foisted on us at the peak of genocidal war. He explained to us that outside this campus, our students will inevitably face people who deny their truth or even celebrate their pain.
In general, I am supportive of inviting adversaries to campus, if you will. And I think it is productive for students to sit in events where controversial figures are speaking. And I think our role as educators and as intellectuals in general is to train students. We owe students this. We need to train students to be used to uncomfortable events, if you will. Because especially students who are majoring in foreign service, right? It is our responsibility to train and teach and maybe advise students on the necessity to interact with people who hold uncomfortable views, because this is the world. We cohabit this world. We cohabit this world with racist people, with fascists, with Nazis, with supremacists, etc., with people who can make us uncomfortable. And this is the world. We need to be comfortable talking to people who make us uncomfortable. There is a delicate line, a thin line that you need to master. Otherwise, you will find yourself unable to contribute, unable to speak, and unable to even take part in events that will be controversial for you.
Part of him believes that we owe it to students to train them for those encounters, to build the muscle of resilience and debate in uncomfortable settings. That's the classic ethos of a school of foreign service. Produce graduates who can engage diplomatically even with adversaries and oppressors. Professor Gabor Scheiring offered us another perspective, a big picture one.
Qatar is not a particularly politically open country. And yet you have a situation where it is encouraged at the university, and I know little about the long-term goals of the country, but my understanding is that there is a recognition that you need critical reflection to have innovation.
He sees this tension between the country and the campus as a kind of an opportunity.
If you want to move away from dependency on fossil fuel, you want innovation, you want a country based on culture and education, you will have to have critical citizens. So seeing that emerge is quite important. Now, and more than important, it's like inspiring, because this is going in a direction of opening up.
In other words, you can't build a knowledge economy without building thinkers. And you can't build thinkers without letting them speak, even when it's uncomfortable.
So any initiative that points in that direction of having these discussions, I think, is crucial, and it will come from universities and the students at the universities, and especially Qatari students at these universities, I think, will play a really important role in figuring out these very fragile spaces of critical discussion that raises often uncomfortable questions.
So within this sphere of Education City, in this cluster of international universities, we need to carve these new spaces for dialogue and dissent. In many ways, what happened with the walkout seems to be part of a broader experiment. The opening of critical discourse in a young country that is otherwise tightly managed. We saw courage not just in the students, but in the very fact that such an episode could unfold without being shut down. We're wrapping up our reflections sitting on the hilltop. The campus inside sits in its orderly silence, but something seems to have shifted in the intangible atmosphere of GUQ. We feel like we felt our own power and tested our own limitations. We have learned that meaningful activism in our context isn't about a single heroic act of defiance or a perfectly executed plan. It's about how we negotiate the space between an institution's protocols and our own conscience. It's about letting competing truths exist.
In our story of the student walkout, there are no absolute heroes or villains. Instead, there are students like Ahmed and Ayet, propelled by moral urgency and personal grief, willing to risk speaking out. There are students who choose to leave, unwilling to lend their presence to a spectacle they found unbearable, enacting a refusal that spoke louder than words. There are also students and staff who believed in dialogue, who felt uneasy about protest, who worried about respect and reputation and the proper way to engage. And there are administrators caught in the middle, bound by what must be done on the surface, yet privately aware that something deeper is at stake. All of them were part of a choreography.
For us, that is the key takeaway from this experience. Student activism here is a collective effort even when we take different approaches. It's a chorus of dissenting moves. And maybe that's exactly what it needs to be. The walkout was imperfect. It was tense, scary, and contingent on so many little acts of courage. It was also, in its imperfection, real. And in that reality, it pointed the way for all of us who will face the next moral test on campus, whatever and whenever that may be.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of GQ Speaks. We hope you've gained valuable insights and inspirations from our conversation today. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to follow us on our Instagram page at GQ_speaks, and be sure to leave a review on Spotify to show your support.